The Confederation had known peace for 12,000 years. 17 different species lived together across hundreds of worlds, trading goods and sharing knowledge. They had forgotten what war truly meant. To them, conflict was something solved with words and trade agreements. Violence was a failure of diplomacy, nothing more. Ambassador Thessaly stood at the observation window of Sanctuary Prime's orbital station. She was tall and thin, with silver-blue skin that seemed to glow softly in the dim light. Her large eyes, dark as deep water, watched the stars with a calm that came from never having known real fear. Sanctuary Prime was the heart of the Confederation. Billions lived on its surface. Libraries held the collected wisdom of 17 civilizations. Children played in parks that had never heard the sound of weapons. It was paradise, and Thessaly loved every corner of it. The warning came without ceremony. A young officer, his voice shaking, announced that unknown ships had been detected at the edge of the system. Thessaly turned from the window, confused. Unknown ships were rare but not alarming. Perhaps lost traders or a new species seeking contact. Then the officer told her the number, 3,000 ships. Thessaly felt her blood turn cold. No trading fleet was that large. No exploration mission needed such numbers. 3,000 ships meant only one thing, and it was something they had only read about in ancient histories. Invasion. The Oran Dominion had been whispered about for centuries. They came from the galactic core, a hive-minded race of creatures that consumed everything in their path. Other civilizations had fallen to them. 6 species had been completely erased from existence, their worlds stripped bare, their people devoured to feed the ever-growing swarm. They had hoped the Oran would never find them. That hope died when those 3,000 ships dropped out of hyperspace and began their approach. Thessaly watched as the peacekeeping fleet moved to intercept, 47 ships. She had always thought that number was impressive. Now it seemed like a cruel joke. The peacekeepers were not warriors. Their ships were designed to escort trading vessels and rescue stranded travelers. They had never fired a weapon in anger. The battle, if anyone could call it that, lasted 11 minutes. Thessaly saw the flashes of light as ships exploded one after another. She heard the communications officer crying as he read out the names of falling vessels. The Oran did not slow down. They did not negotiate. They simply destroyed everything in their path and kept coming. When it was over, not a single ship remained. The path to Sanctuary Prime was open. Thessaly forced herself to act. She ran to the communications center and began sending messages to every ally the Confederation had. Surely someone would help. Surely the bonds of friendship and trade would mean something in this dark hour. The responses came slowly, and each one broke her heart a little more. The collective expressed deep sympathy but could not risk their own worlds. The Republic sent prayers for the safety, but their fleet was needed for defense. The trade union offered financial assistance for refugees, but no ships, no soldiers, no help that mattered. Everyone was afraid. The Oran had already consumed 6 civilizations. No one wanted to be the 7th. Thessaly slumped in her chair as the first Oran landing pods began descending toward Sanctuary Prime. Through the window, she could see them falling like dark rain, each one carrying hundreds of the warriors. On the planet below, billions had nowhere to run and no way to fight. She thought about her family. Her parents lived in the capital city. Her younger brother worked in the great library. Her niece was only 4 years old, just beginning to learn about the wonders of the universe. They would all die, and Thessaly could do nothing to save them. In her despair, she remembered something. Years ago, a survey probe had passed through a distant star system and discovered a young species that had just begun exploring space. The probe had scanned their world and classified it as a Category 9, one of the most dangerous planet types in the known galaxy. The gravity was too high. The radiation from their sun was too intense. The native life was violent and aggressive. The The climate shifted wildly between deadly extremes. By all logic, intelligent life should never have evolved there, yet it had. The species called themselves humans, and they lived on a world they called Earth. The Confederation had marked their system as uninhabitable and moved on. Humans were primitive, barely capable of interstellar travel. They were not members of the Confederation. They had no reason to care about the. But Thessaly had nothing left to lose. She found the old frequency that the survey probe had recorded and began broadcasting. Her message was simple. She told whoever might be listening that the Confederation was dying, that the Orion swarm was consuming their worlds, that they had asked everyone for help and been refused. She did not beg. She did not make promises. She simply told the truth and asked if anyone was willing to stand with them. Then she sat back and watched the invasion continue. The first reports from the surface were terrible. Orion warriors poured out of their landing pods and began attacking everything that moved. They had no army. Their security forces carried stun weapons designed to subdue criminals, not kill enemies. Against the Orion, they might as well have carried flowers. City after city fell. The screaming on the communication channels was unbearable. Thessaly listened to it all, bearing witness to the death of her civilization. After several hours, she noticed something strange. The communication console showed that her message to the humans had been received. Not only received, but someone had responded. The response was brief, just a series of numbers that her computer identified as a standard acknowledgement code. Someone had heard her. Thessaly did not allow herself to hope. The humans were primitive. Even if they wanted to help, what could they do against 3,000 Orion warships? It would take them months to reach space if they could even make the journey. By then, everyone would be dead. But she sent another message anyway, updating the humans on the situation, and another, and another. If the Confederation was going to die, she decided, at least someone would know what had happened to them. At least someone would remember. On the surface of Sanctuary Prime, they retreated toward their capital city for a final stand they knew they could not win. Above them, the orbital stations burned. Around them, a galaxy of allies watched in silence, too afraid to act. All hope was lost. Or so they believed. 6 months before the Orion attacked Sanctuary Prime, a small probe had wandered too close to a yellow star in a quiet arm of the galaxy. The probe had done what it was designed to do. It scanned the third planet from the star and sent its findings back to Confederation headquarters. The report was not encouraging. The planet had gravity 30% higher than Confederation standard. Its sun blasted the surface with dangerous radiation. The atmosphere carried violent storms that could tear apart structures. Earthquakes shook the ground. Volcanoes spewed poison into the air. The oceans were filled with predators that would terrify any sensible species. Worst of all, the dominant life form had evolved under these conditions. They were not soft and peaceful like the. They were products of a world that wanted to kill them every single day. The probe classified Earth as a Category 9 and recommended that the system be avoided. No civilized species would want to live there, and the natives were far too primitive to matter. The probe then continued on its way, never knowing that the natives had intercepted its transmission. Admiral read the translation for the third time. She sat in her office aboard the UNS Defiance, humanity's first true interstellar warship. The ship was ugly by any standard, a block of armor and weapons with no thought given to beauty. It had been built by a species that expected the universe to be hostile. Was 52 years old. Her hair had gone gray from stress, not age. Her face carried scars from battles she was not allowed to talk about. She had served in 3 wars before humanity even knew aliens existed, and she had won all of them. The alien probe had called Earth, it had called humans primitive. It had recommended that their system be avoided like a disease. Smiled when she read that part. The aliens had no idea what they were dealing with. Humanity had spent its entire existence fighting the planet that tried to kill them, fighting the animals that hunted them, fighting each other over land and resources and ideas. They had survived ice ages and plagues and wars that killed millions. They had split the atom and walked on their moon and built machines that could think. And now they had learned they were not alone in the universe. The United Nations had reacted to this discovery by doing something unprecedented. For the first time in human history, the nations of Earth agreed on something. They pooled their resources and built the Defiance. They trained crews to operate in conditions that would kill any soft-bodied alien. They armed their ship with weapons that the peaceful would consider barbaric. Then they waited to see what the universe would throw at them. The answer came in the form of Ambassador Thessaly's desperate broadcast. Brought the message to the United Nations Emergency Council herself. She stood before the representatives of 200 nations and played the recording. They heard a frightened voice speaking of invasion and death. They heard names of species they had never encountered. They heard a plea for help from someone who expected no answer. The debate lasted for hours. Some argued that humanity should stay out of alien affairs. They had never even acknowledged humanity's existence. Why should human soldiers die for aliens who thought of them as primitive? Others worried about the Iran. If they could destroy civilizations that had thousands of years of space travel experience, what chance did humanity have? The smart move was to hide and hope the swarm never found Earth. Listened to all of it, then she asked permission to speak. She told them about the Iran. She explained what her intelligence officers had learned from the transmissions, a hive-minded species that consumed everything, 6 civilizations already erased, an endless hunger that would never stop. She told them what would happen if the Iran were allowed to continue. Eventually, they would reach Earth. Maybe not this year, maybe not this century, but eventually the swarm would come, and by then it would be too large for anyone to stop. Then she told them something else. She told them about a peaceful people who had never known war, 17 species who had built something beautiful together, billions of innocent lives that would be extinguished while the galaxy watched and did nothing. She looked at the representatives and asked a simple question. What kind of species did humanity want to be? The kind that hid in fear while others suffered, or the kind that stood up when no one else would? The vote was close, but it passed. Returned to the Defiance and began preparing for war. She was joined by 12 other ships, each one crewed by volunteers from nations that had spent centuries fighting each other. American and Chinese sailors worked side by side. Russian and European soldiers trained together. Old enemies became brothers and sisters in arms. They called themselves the Fleet. The journey to space would take months at maximum speed, pushed her ships harder than they were designed to go. She ran drills every day, preparing her crews for combat against an enemy they had never faced. She studied every scrap of information about the Iran, looking for weaknesses. She found some. The Iran were strong, but they were predictable. Their hive mind made them coordinated, but it also made them slow to adapt. They had never faced an enemy that thought independently but fought as one. Humans had been doing exactly that since the beginning of their history. Also noticed something else. Every species that had faced the Iran had tried to fight defensively. They had tried to protect everything at once, spreading their forces thin. They had tried to minimize casualties, retreating whenever the cost grew too high. That was not how humans fought. Humans attacked, humans took risks, humans were willing to die to win. As the fleet raced through hyperspace towards Sanctuary Prime, addressed her crews, she told them the truth. They were outnumbered. Many of them would not survive. The odds were against them. But she also told them why they were going. Billions of innocent people were dying. An entire civilization was being erased. The galaxy had abandoned them. And when the galaxy abandoned someone, humans showed up. She asked if anyone wanted to turn back. Not a single hand was raised. The fleet continued on, carrying 10,000 soldiers and crew members who had volunteered to fight a war that was not their own. They did not know if they could win. They only knew that someone had to try. And humans had never been good at accepting the impossible. Sanctuary Prime was burning. Commander Al stood on the ancient walls of the capital city and watched smoke rise from the horizon. 3 of the planet's 5 major cities had fallen. Millions were dead. The screaming on the communication channels had stopped hours ago, replaced by the terrible silence of extinction. Al was old for nearly 200 years. He had spent his entire military career conducting ceremonial parades and escorting diplomats. He had never fired a weapon at a living being. None of his soldiers had. The military existed for tradition, not combat. Now he was expected to defend the last stronghold of his civilization with soldiers who did not know how to fight. Behind him, the evacuation ships were preparing to launch. Ambassador Thessaly had organized everything. The ships would carry children, the elderly, and those too weak to stand. They would flee to distant colonies and hope the Iran did not follow. But everyone knew the truth. The ships would never launch in time. The Iran swarm was less than an hour away. Their black tide covered the land to the east, millions of warriors marching toward the capital with hunger in their compound eyes. Al had accepted death. He had made peace with it. His only regret was that he could not give his people a better ending. Thessaly joined him on the wall. Her silver-blue skin was pale with exhaustion. She had not slept in days. She had spent every moment coordinating rescue efforts, answering distress calls, and watching her world die piece by piece. She told Al about the messages she had sent to the humans. She did not know if they had received them. She did not know if they were coming. It had been months since her first broadcast, and she had heard nothing but that single acknowledgement code. Al nodded. He had read about humans in the old survey reports from a savage planet, primitive, violent, not the kind of species that a civilized person would want to meet. But at this moment, he would welcome any help, even from savages. The Iran swarm reached the outer walls of the city. Al watched his soldiers raise their stun weapons with shaking hands. They fired, and the leading wave of insects stumbled and fell. But more came behind them, always more. The Iran did not care about losses. They had numbers beyond counting. The first breach happened within minutes. Iran warriors poured through a gap in the wall, their mandibles clicking with hunger. Soldiers fell back in panic. They had never seen death up close. They did not know how to face it. Al drew his ceremonial blade, a weapon that had not tasted blood in 5,000 years, and prepared to die defending his people. Then the sky tore open. A flash of light split the darkness above the capital, then another, then a dozen more. Al looked up and saw shapes emerging from hyperspace directly above the city. Ships, small by galactic standards, ugly and blocky, covered in weapons that looked crude but deadly. 13 ships, against the thousands that orbited Sanctuary Prime. A voice cut through every communication frequency. It spoke in heavily accented, clearly translated by a computer that did not fully understand the language. But the meaning was clear. The voice identified itself as Admiral of the United Nations ship Defiance. It announced that Sanctuary Prime was now under human protection. It gave the Iran 30 seconds to begin withdrawal. Thessaly felt tears streaming down her face. They had come. The primitive from the savage planet had actually come. Al watched the Iran fleet begin to turn toward the human ships. The insects did not retreat. They had never encountered a species foolish enough to challenge them with such small numbers. They saw the human fleet as a minor obstacle, nothing more. 29 seconds passed. The UNS Defiance fired its main weapon. Al had never seen anything like it. A beam of pure light lanced out from the human flagship and struck the largest Oran vessel. The alien ship's shields flared and then simply disappeared. The beam continued through the hull, and the Oran flagship exploded in a ball of fire that could be seen from the planet's surface. The human ships did not wait for a response. They charged directly into the Oran formation, firing everything they had. Missiles streaked through space. Cannons roared. Nuclear warheads detonated against hulls. They had always believed that warfare required caution, defense, careful planning. The humans believed something different. They believed in attack. The Oran scattered in confusion. They had never faced an enemy that moved this way, that fought with such reckless aggression. Their hive minds struggled to coordinate a response to opponents who acted independently but somehow worked together. On the planet's surface, landing pods began falling from the human ships. Not escape pods, Al realized. Assault pods. The humans were not just fighting in space. They were sending soldiers to the ground. The pods crashed into the fields outside the capital, and armored figures emerged. They were shorter than, but broad and heavy with muscle. They carried weapons that made terrible sounds and left terrible holes. They moved with a confidence that Al had never seen in any species. They ran toward the Oran swarm without hesitation. Al watched in amazement as a single human soldier engaged 3 Oran warriors at once. They were larger, stronger, and had natural armor and claws. By every measure, the human should have died instantly. Instead, the human killed all 3 of them in less than 10 seconds. The soldier looked up at the wall where Al stood. Through the helmet visor, the commander saw a human face, young, female, smiling. The soldier shouted something that the translation system rendered as a question. She was asking if they were going to stand there watching, or if they were going to help. Al looked at his ancient blade. He looked at his frightened soldiers. He looked at the enemy that had destroyed his civilization. Then he climbed down from the wall and walked toward the human lines. He did not know how to fight, but perhaps it was time to learn. The battle lasted for 3 days. Admiral had known from the beginning that her fleet could not win through firepower alone. 13 ships against 3,000 was not a battle. It was suicide, but had not come to fight a fair battle. She had come to win an unfair one. Human military history was filled with stories of the few defeating the many. Thermopylae, Drift, the Battle of Britain. Humans had learned long ago that numbers did not always decide victory. Tactics did. The willingness to do whatever was necessary to survive. Divided her fleet into 3 strike groups. Each group operated independently, making decisions without waiting for orders. The Oran hive mind was fast, but it was centralized. When one group of insects adjusted to attack a human ship, that ship would already be gone, and another would be striking from a different angle. The Defiance took the most dangerous position, put her flagship at the front of every engagement, drawing fire that would have destroyed smaller vessels. Her ship was designed for this. Layers of armor, redundant systems, a crew that could operate in conditions that would kill any. The Oran tried to overwhelm her with numbers. They sent dozens of ships against the Defiance at once, responded by flying directly into their formation, so close that the insects could not fire without hitting their own vessels. Her weapons crews fired point-blank into Oran hulls while her pilots performed maneuvers that should have torn the ship apart. They held together. Humans had built the Defiance to survive. In space, the battle was brutal. Human ships took terrible damage. The UNS Resolute lost half her crew when an Oran missile breached her engineering section. The UNS Vengeance was rammed by a destroyer and lost all power. The UNS Horizon was completely destroyed, her crew of 600 gone in an instant. But the humans kept fighting. Every ship that fell took a dozen Oran vessels with it. Every crew that died had made sure their deaths meant something. The Oran had never encountered this before. Their previous enemies had retreated when losses became too high. They had surrendered when victory seemed impossible. The humans did neither. They fought as if death meant nothing to them. On the ground, the situation was equally desperate. Commander Al stood in a trench that human soldiers had dug in less than an hour. He held a human weapon in his hands, a projectile launcher that the soldiers called a rifle. It was heavy and loud and terrifying. It was also very effective at killing Iran. A young human sergeant named Maria was teaching him how to use it. She was patient despite the chaos around them. She showed him how to aim, how to breathe, how to squeeze the trigger instead of pulling it. She told him not to think about what he was shooting, just aim and fire. The soldiers around him were learning the same lessons. They were terrified. They had never held weapons designed to kill, but they were also angry. They had watched their cities burn. They had seen their families die. For the first time in 12,000 years, they wanted to fight back. The Iran attacked in waves. Thousands of warriors charged the human in lines, mandibles clicking, claws reaching. The defenders fired until their weapons overheated. When that happened, they used explosives. When the explosives ran out, some of the humans fought with knives and fists. Al watched a human marine tackle a Iran warrior twice his size. The claws ripped through the marine's armor, but the human kept fighting. He pulled out a blade and drove it into the creature's eye. They died together, tangled in each other's limbs. The commander had never seen anything like it. The humans were not stronger than the Iran. They were not faster or better armored, but they had something the insects did not. They refused to lose. By the second day, the Iran had stopped sending boarding pods. Their ground assault had stalled. For every soldier that fell, 10 warriors died. The ratio should have been reversed, but the humans had changed everything. They had taught that survival was possible, that fighting back was not hopeless, that even the smallest defender could make a difference. In space, the tide was turning. The Iran fleet had lost 800 ships. Their coordination was failing as human tactics disrupted their hive mind. Individual Iran vessels began acting erratically, making mistakes that their collective intelligence would never have allowed. Saw the opening. She gathered her surviving ships and launched a concentrated assault on the Iran command cluster. The insects had protected their leadership throughout the battle, but now their formation was in chaos. The Defiance led the charge. Her hull was with wounds. 3 of her weapon systems were destroyed. Half her crew was dead or injured, but she still flew and her remaining weapons still fired. Targeted the secondary command ship that had taken over after she destroyed the flagship. Her weapons officers fired everything they had left. The Iran vessel exploded, and for a moment, the entire fleet went silent. The hive mind had lost its center. Iran ships began colliding with each other. Weapons fired at random. Warriors on the ground stopped in mid-attack, confused and directionless. The collective that had conquered 6 civilizations had been thrown into chaos. Broadcast a simple message. She told the Iran that this was their last chance to retreat. She told them what would happen if they stayed. For the first time in their species' memory, the Iran listened. On the morning of the 3rd day, the remaining ships began withdrawing. 400 vessels out of the original 3,000 turned and fled toward the galactic core. They broadcast warnings to their home systems. Avoid the Orion Spur. Avoid the species called human. The swarm had finally learned fear. On the surface of Sanctuary Prime, Commander Al watched the Iran ground forces retreat into the wilderness. They would be hunted down in the coming weeks, but the immediate threat was over. The capital city had survived. The evacuation ships would not be needed. Al looked at the human rifle in his hands. He looked at the bodies of friend and enemy alike scattered across the battlefield. He looked at Sergeant, who was sitting in the dirt, bleeding from a wound in her side but still smiling. He did not have words for what he felt. Gratitude was not enough. The language had no term for what the humans had done. They had saved everything. The silence after battle was strange. Admiral stood on the bridge of the UNS Defiance and looked at the stars through a cracked viewport. Her ship had given everything she had. The hull was torn open in a dozen places. The main reactor was failing. The medical bay was filled with wounded sailors who might not survive the journey home. 7 of her 13 ships were gone. 4,000 human soldiers and crew members had died in the battle for Sanctuary Prime. They had left Earth as volunteers, knowing they might never return. They had been right. Felt the weight of their deaths pressing down on her. She knew their names. She had written letters to their families before the fleet had left Sol. She had promised to bring them home. Some promises could not be kept. But when she looked at Sanctuary Prime below, she saw cities that still stood. She saw evacuation ships that would never need to launch. She saw billions of who would live because 10,000 humans had been willing to die. The price was terrible, but the alternative would have been worse. Ambassador Thessaly came aboard the Defiance 3 days after the battle ended. She walked through corridors filled with exhausted sailors and wounded Marines. She saw the damage that the humans had endured. She saw the cost they had paid. When she reached the bridge, she found sitting alone in the captain's chair. The admiral's arm was in a sling. Her face was lined with grief and exhaustion. She looked older than she had before the battle. Thessaly had prepared a speech. She had written words of gratitude and praise that she thought might express what they felt. But when she stood before this tired, wounded human, all her careful words disappeared. She simply bowed, a deep formal bow that they reserved for their greatest heroes, and she said 2 words. "Thank you." Nodded, she did not smile. She had lost too many friends for smiling. But she told Thessaly that the humans had not come for gratitude. They had come because it was right. They had come because someone needed help and no one else would give it. That was what humans did. That was who they were. The Confederation Council met 1 week later. The meeting was held in a bombed-out government building because the official council chambers had been destroyed. Representatives from all 17 member species attended, though many of them had traveled from distant colonies where they had fled during the invasion. Ambassador Thessaly stood before the council and made a formal request. She asked that humanity be admitted to the galactic community as a full member of the Confederation. The debate was short. The vote was unanimous. Admiral was invited to address the council after the vote. She stood before the assembled representatives of 17 civilizations, a single human from that the galaxy had dismissed as primitive and dangerous. She thanked them for the invitation. She told them that humanity was honored to join the Confederation. She promised that humans would be good allies and honest partners. Then she issued a warning. She told the council that humans had not come to be saved. They had come to save others. They had come because they were in danger and no one else would help. They would do the same for any member of the Confederation who faced extinction. But the council needed to understand something about humans. They came from a world that wanted to kill them. They had survived ice ages and plagues and wars. They had fought each other for thousands of years before they learned to fight together. They were not gentle. They were not peaceful. They were exactly what the old survey probe had called them. Looked at the assembled aliens with eyes that had seen too much death. She told them that if the Iran returned, or if any other threat came for the Confederation, they should call the humans. Humans would come. Humans would fight. And then the enemy would learn why Earth was called a. They would learn why humans were still alive after everything their planet had thrown at them. The galaxy would learn that, when all hope was lost, there was still one species willing to stand against the darkness. Thessaly watched the human admiral speak. She remembered the terrified message she had broadcast months ago, expecting no answer. She remembered the flash of light when the fleet had arrived. She remembered the sound of human weapons and the sight of human soldiers charging towards certain death. She understood now why the old survey probe had been afraid of Earth. Humans were dangerous, violent, savage by standards. But they were also willing to die for strangers. They were willing to cross the galaxy to defend people who had never even acknowledged their existence. They had the capacity for terrible destruction, but they chose to use it for protection. That was the most human thing of all. The compact was signed the next day. It was a simple document, a mutual defense treaty between humanity and the Confederation. An attack on one would be an attack on all. Over the following months, other species asked to join the compact. Civilizations that had hidden from the Orion now sought the protection of the alliance grew from 18 members to 30, then 50, then more. The UNS Defiance never flew again. Her damage was too severe, her reactors too unstable. Ordered her scuttled in orbit around Sanctuary Prime, where she would remain forever as a monument to those who had died in her defense. On the anniversary of the battle, children would look up at the sky and see the Defiance hanging above them. They would ask their parents about the strange, ugly ship and the savage aliens who had crewed her. And their parents would tell them the story of how all hope was lost, the story of how the galaxy had abandoned them, the story of how 13 primitive ships had crossed the stars to save 17 civilizations from extinction, the story of the who had arrived when no one else would come, the story of humanity,